Let's talk about tension. Tension is one of those things in stories that is a little bit tricky because different people have different tolerances for tension. Different story types have different tolerances for tension. Different genres have different requirements for tension. And so it's hard to talk about this subject in sort of a catch-all way. However, one thing is universally true. Tension of some sort is needed in a story if you want people to continue reading. Now, that doesn't mean that all tension is the same. And so depending on what you're writing, adjust how you're listening to this video accordingly. For anybody who's new to the channel, welcome. My name is Seth. I'm a full-time author and I write fantasy books and make YouTube videos about being an author and writing and stuff like that. I've been thinking a lot about this question of tension, though, because I am in the process of doing some self-evaluation on some of my stories, trying to understand where I've been failing and where I've been succeeding. And one of the critical points that I've been examining is how tension works in my stories. I tend to have a very sort of easygoing way of writing. And that's partly just personal preference. I don't like stories with a huge amount of tension. I don't like leaving a story more tense than when I started it. Additionally, my goal with every story that I write is that people would be happier and more uplifted when they're finished than when they began. And so in light of that, tension has always been something that I've struggled with. I really like slice of life. I really like sort of relaxed paces. For me, a story is supposed to be an escape. And so I don't want to write something that is going to set my teeth on edge. At the same time, I understand that other people have different reasons for writing and different kinds of stories they like. And regardless, tension is super important in every story. So let's talk about 3 ways that we can directly address the tension in our story. The first is through the characters. A character with no tension at all, they just become boring. They're not interesting to watch. And for a character, tension can come in 2 ways. It can come internally and it can come externally. It's best in a story if the tension does come in both ways. A great example of this is the main character of Battle Mage Farmer, John. He has 2 particular points of tension. The first is that he's trying to start a farm and he doesn't really know anything about farming. And that creates all sorts of external tension, where there are forces around him who are trying to push him into particular ways of acting or are trying to get things from him, and he has to navigate through that. When he shows up to the farm in the beginning of Domestication, which is book 1 in the series, he finds that other people have occupied the farm, and he has to deal with that. Then he finds that his cows have been stolen, and he has to deal with that. Then he discovers that the farm has all sorts of needs, and he has to work to meet them. Those are all external kinds of tension, and they're not necessarily life and death stakes, but they are stakes. If he cannot solve these problems, he cannot reach his objective of having a farm. Now, at the same time, he also has internal stakes. And those internal stakes, in this case, are significant. He believes himself to be other, inhuman, and he has plenty of evidence to back it up. That internal conflict and struggle that he faces is something that he has to work through in light of everything that's going on around him. And so, while he is trying to start a farm, in many ways the story is actually about John trying to prove that he's human. And because he wrestles with himself, it adds a layer of tension to the story. Character conflict is, whether external or internal, is one of the best ways to add tension to a story. But it's not the only way to add tension to a story. You can also add tension via story elements. Things happening in the world that are outside of a character's control that up the stakes. Battle Mage Farmer does this as well with doom points. Though you don't know exactly what at the beginning of the story, there is something happening, a ticker that is continually rising, getting closer and closer to the apocalypse. And John is constantly trying to claw that count back down towards 0 to keep the apocalypse from happening. Unfortunately, he has no idea why the doom points continue to go up. And so this creates a sense of tension from outside of him that is completely outside of his control. It's just a part of the plot. It's a part of the story elements that up the stakes at critical times. In an adventure story, the hero might get a phone call that adds a complication to what they're trying to do, creating more pressure externally as they try to complete their own objectives. It could be a war between nations that all of a sudden takes the main character's plans and throws them out the window, forcing them to adjust and deal with this external situation. It could be any number of things. A kitten getting lost. It doesn't really matter. The point is that a great way to layer tension on top of your character conflict is to then have story conflict on top of it. Something that acts as an impediment to the character getting what they want that is completely outside their control. And then finally, we can add atmospheric tension. Atmospheric tension could also be called world-building tension. And that is that the environment that a character is in has the ability to either be mundane or tense. And when I say tense, I don't really mean that it's stressful. I instead mean that there is some sort of conflict in the environment itself that creates a problem for the main character. It could be weather, a terribly cold blizzard, or a scorching dry spell. It could be terrain, the rockiness of the mountains that makes travel slow when the character really wants to get somewhere quickly. It could be some sort of threat in the world, monsters, nightmares. Using our Battle Mage Farmer example, the world is getting progressively more poisonous as the level of ambient mana grows, threatening to kill everybody. These are sort of the three levels that I like to try and establish. Your character conflict, your story conflict, and your world-building conflict. And I find that by layering them, we can create stories that have quite a bit of tension, regardless of whether the pace of the story is slow or not. Battle Mage Farmer is still slice of life. Well, slice of life adjacent, at least. But it still has all of those tensions in it. So as you're sitting down to write your next story, maybe spend a couple of minutes thinking about it. How am I introducing tension into this story? Is it coming from the characters? Is it coming from the plot? Or is it coming from the world building? And ideally, how can you make it come from all three? If you have any questions about any of this, definitely leave them in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on introducing tension into your stories. I'm always looking to learn how to do this better.